RadioNext.tv on the Cool Groove site. It is that time again, Wednesday morning, 10 a.m. to 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Dr. Mark Echo, Harold H.B. Bell in here, Warp and Woof on the radio. What's up, partner?
We are here. We are weaving the vertical and horizontal threads, man.
Hey, man, great show today. We're going to be introducing the great works of the Wheeler Mission. You might think you know about it, but we're going to tell you all about it, and great guest in studio in our second hour to let you know all of the great works. Mr. Dennis Abrams will be in the house, and we're going to talk about how you can help contribute to this great cause. Dr. Mark is feeling kind of community conscious and working as a whole with the body, but the show is sponsored by Comenius Institute. Before we go to our musical break and come back, Mark, tell them a little bit about Comenius.
Yeah, Comenius. So what we do is we focus our attention on students going into IUPUI, and our interest is answering academic intellectual questions that they have. So I meet with students throughout the week, interested in what they have to say, kinds of assignments they're dealing with, that kind of thing. And actually, this coming Sunday night, we have a movie night down in my basement, so it'll be good times.
Oh, man, the movie buff is at it again. We'll be right back. You're listening to Warping with Radio on the Cool Groove site at RadioNext.tv. RadioNext.tv on the Cool Groove site. Dr. Mark Echo, Harold H.B. Bell here. Warp and Woof Radio every Wednesday morning, 10 a.m. to 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Bring you the most comprehensive information that you can stand, especially in how it relates to living through the book of Proverbs.
There you go.
We're real true about it. The rules and the wisdom that can help you throughout your life. And today, we're talking about the whole people. But before we get going, Dr. Mark, I guess you have some announcements to make. Catching up on some of the shows that we've had, and then what's going to be happening in the future.
That's right, absolutely. So next week we're going to be dealing specifically with the arena of business, and that'll be a lot of fun. We're going to have We Power. Phil's going to be up in the house here with us. And you're actually going to be out.
We're actually doing a live remote from the YMCA with the young folks and the old folks, grandparents able to bring their grandkids. So it's going to be a good time. We're going to be on the Rock Room site, so we won't be interrupting with the Cool Groove flow over here.
That's good, man. That's good. It's good to hear those things. Well, I'll just catch you up on a few things. The Edge Mentoring Conference this last week went really well with Dante Cook. Was up here last week. Had about 2,000 people up at Grace Church.
Wow.
Yeah, man, that was huge stuff. I wish I'd been in town for that. Wheels, City Life Wheels, doing really great. Nate Hershey back in touch with me this week, telling me how much they enjoyed the specifics of that particular time we spent with them a couple weeks ago. Edgar and Gussie and all the rest who were here. Mike Roll, Q Commons, is this Thursday, tomorrow night from 7 to 9. Looking forward to that. Actually, I'm running a PhD course out in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and we are going to be actually going down to the city of Lancaster for that. Okara and Sammy, remember those two ladies?
I remember.
Yeah. Do you know we set them up? I'm telling you, man, the interview we did with them, they were then on WFYI. Check that out.
Wow.
Check it out. Their interview on WFYI. Check out Okara and Sammy there. Mark Goins, his comments about the Enneagram were actually promoted today by Michael Hyatt, very famous leadership consultant who seems to have just found out about these things, but Mark's been doing this for some time. And by the way, I'm going to Mark's church on Friday, the last Friday in October, and he's bringing in high school students, college students, and I'm going to be speaking on horror films.
Oh. No, you're kidding me.
For evangelism toward Halloween. There it is. Then we got to mention Deja Henry. We wanted to have Deja on this week, but Deja's a little under the weather. Wanted to promote a couple of great things she's doing. She did a short film in L.A. that won some awards. It's called The Levenator. The Levenator, Levenator. Go check it out. And then she just is, there's a new film opening this week at the Georgetown
yes.
Cinemas. Okay. And it's called Lost. Okay. And Deja is in it.
Incredible and young talent.
She's going to be on the red carpet this week. So check it out this Thursday. I think it's tomorrow night, actually. And then we have one more celebration, and this is really important to me. HB's birthday is next week.
Oh, man, I forgot all about it.
HB's birthday, and I brought HB a present. Tell everybody what my present says.
Music is my first language. Man, look up, man. We got to get this picture out.
We got to get a picture.
And while we're taking the picture, let me apologize to City Wills. I had given Phil that card to help out with the little business he's doing with the returning citizens so he could get folks around. And, of course, after I thank you, sir, and thank you very much.
You're welcome.
But, of course, after, you say, hey, man, look, I need those keys back. He found a way to get the car off the lot, but it's still going to a good cause. I just didn't want City Wheels to think I had forgotten. But that's the kind of the lowdown on that. So Phil is able now to get his guys and the crew some returning citizens that he's providing work for back and forth to where he's going. So it's still a good cause, great mission. So
absolutely.
Just what we're doing, though, with this platform, Mark, and we talk about all the time, is just introducing people to other programs, other projects, different ways of thinking on the whole. And that's what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
So I guess what the first question I would have today is, what does Proverbs say about caring for the whole person?
Oh, man, there's so much to say about all this, and I'm really grateful for the book of Proverbs here, because it really does teach us an awful lot about how we ought to think differently than we usually do. So let me read a few verses here. This is actually in Proverbs 30, verses 7 through 9. It says, 2 things I ask of you. Deny them not to me before I die. Remove far from me falsehood and lying. Give me neither poverty nor riches. That's the line. I love that. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me, lest I be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God.
Wow.
Man. Talk about a wholeness of life. We are really concerned about the whole person here. This really is a focal point. We are going to be talking about some addictions, however, and I would be remiss if I didn't speak specifically about what Proverbs says about alcoholism. So Proverbs 20 and verse 1 says, wine produces mockers, alcohol leads to brawls. Those who are led astray by drink cannot be wise.
Look here, man. This is way back 3,000 years ago, man.
That's right.
And
same stuff.
Same stuff. And we don't get it.
Proverbs 23 is another one. And actually, if you want to know what it looks like, what an alcoholic looks like, if you've never seen one, I mean, I grew up with one, so I get that real good. But if you go over to Proverbs chapter 23, verses 29 to 35, this is a long list of what it looks like, what an alcoholic actually looks like. In the end, it says alcohol bites like a serpent, stings like an adder. Your eyes will see strange things. Your heart will utter perverse things. You will be like one who lies down in the midst of the sea, like one who lies on the top of a mast. They struck me, you say, but I was not hurt. They beat me, but I did not feel it. When will I wake up? I must have another drink. I mean, my word.
Wow.
Straight out of Proverbs. So there it is. Some really specific statements about concerns that we all have about caring for the whole person, and specifically we'll talk about addictions today.
Awesome. And I'm sure when we get with Dennis later on and we start talking Wheeler Mission, we will find out that the addictive nature is probably why most of the people have been led to some of those descriptions that you just read out of Proverbs. What does the rest of the scripture say about the whole person?
Well, I got to tell you, man, my second favorite book in the Bible is Leviticus. Now, when I tell people that, they kind of look at me a little strange. In fact, when I tell them that my top 5 books, out of my top 5 books in the Bible, none of them is in the New Testament, people get people look sideways.
I'll get some Christians upset.
They look sideways at me. But I wrote a thing some time back that I just wanted to mention here this morning about Twinkies. Now, I know that Twinkies doesn't seem to be on the surface to really match with Leviticus, but Leviticus has all kinds of law codes in it, and specifically for the well-being and physical health of the people of the day. Now, of course, there are some of necessity, some explanation of some of the things that are said in the book of Leviticus for people 3,000 years later. But nonetheless, there are some really great health codes in Leviticus, not the least of which is that God said, destroy the fat before you eat the meat. So the fat was to be something sacrificed. And when we know all that we know about arterial sclerosis, all kinds of issues concerning the heart, gee, isn't it interesting that God said, destroy the fat before you eat the meat?
Wow. Principles of the Bible
There
never
you go,
change.
man.
That's why I tell people all the time, I don't care if you're a believer or not.
Yeah.
Even if you're not, you can't go wrong by practicing.
You can't go wrong.
And reading what the books have. And so I'm like, at worst, you're going to be a better person.
That's right.
But believing has a set, a set of peace in it that you can't describe. We're going to come back. When we come back, what we want to talk about is, current events and life events and what's going on with organizations and churches trying to help the people as a whole. You're listening to Warping with Radio on the Cool Groove site at RadioNext.tv. RadioNext.tv on the Cool Groove site. You are listening to Warping with Radio. Dr. Mark Echo, Harold H.B. Bell in the house, and we are talking about we the people as a whole, and we have to become a little bit more conscious of that fine line between prosperity and disparity. There's a line right now where I just heard a statistic where only a quarter of the people have a savings of more than like $1,000.
That's right.
People are living paycheck to paycheck.
That's right.
But we're so easy to criticize when we see these people who are homeless, or see some of these people who have turned to drugs or whatever, to deal with everyday crisis. So we need some examples of the whole person concept, Mark. Give me some examples.
So here's just an example of this. And again, we could delve into all different kinds of areas, but here's just one. I'm talking about the food thing. So 95% of all chronic disease comes from food choices. This is an amazing little statistic. So our food choices, including toxic ingredients and lack of physical exercise. So 95% of all chronic disease comes from this. So I want to mention a couple of places that I think might be actually helpful to us to kind of push us beyond what we normally think about the kinds of things we ought to be doing. So I would encourage everybody to check out prevention.com. That's prevention.com. It is a magazine that can come to your house in a physical form, but you can also find this stuff online. So for instance, right now on my computer I'm looking at 7 diet tweaks your body wants you to make this fall, and this was just published this last week, and there's all kinds of great information in here on the kinds of things that we ought to be doing. Using a slow cooker, for instance, swapping cereal for oats, going heavy on beans. There's all kinds of cool stuff in here that I think would be really helpful for us. Another idea here, and this comes back to another blog site. This is called longevitywarehouse.com. longevitywarehouse.com. And here we find all kinds of examples of different things that are options for us. Scientific analysis and research, things that have to do with our skin, even the kinds of coffee that we drink. Antioxidants, which is a big deal, which really is a problematic issue. We could talk about that, have a whole program on antioxidants, actually. Vitamins, exercise again, 10 reasons to make sure that your corporate well-being is good. So this is for all those in business out there. Take good care of your employees. We could go on and on about this, but I just chose the food angle specifically because I'm interested in and concerned about the kinds of things we put into our body. We talk about our minds on this show, but what are we going to put into our body physically?
And before we go to the next question, as you were reading the things that we need to do, but it seems like we're promoting as a society, as mainstream television or whatever, everything we promote are the unhealthy things that we shouldn't have.
Right.
And so when we're leading people to those items, awareness is one of the most critical portions, I would say, as we take care of our body. And speaking of it, how important is the physical life? So
I got to tell you about our children. Boy, how many years ago was it now? 15 plus years ago, we diagnosed our son with gluten intolerance, celiac disease. And what we discovered about Tyler, for years, 5 to 7 years, he had dealt with these issues of really having headaches and stomach aches, and really nobody knew what was going on with him physically. We moved to Wheaton, Illinois, where I was teaching at Moody Bible Institute, And we got some new doctors who actually understood the gluten bit. So they did a biopsy of a small intestine. They took a little chunk out of there just to see what was going on. And you know all those villi that are standing up supposed to take in your nutrients? They were all flattened in Tyler's intestine. He had been taking in no nutrients for years. So think about the implications of this. It actually took a year and a half for all those villi to stand back up again. So Robin was now invested. We all were invested in the gluten-free dietary issues because anybody that has studied this stuff knows that if you can continue down this path and continue to eat the wrong things, you can develop cancer of the stomach real easily. So this was the kind of thing that we discovered in Tyler. And then a few years later, Chelsea was, because she's such a giver, she wanted to give blood. So she went to give blood. 3 times she tried. They refused her 3 times, every single time because she was anemic. Well, she had the same stuff done to her, the same studies and so on. Come to find out, she had exactly the same problem.
Wow.
So she had, and still does continue, as they both do, eating fresh foods, fresh vegetables, a focus on healthy diet, all of those kinds of things, because they have to. It's of necessity for them. But when I think about that, then I think about how important the fresh food thing is just to everybody, and how important we ought to be imbibing in those kinds of things.
And back to my previous statement, organic is the most expensive food out on the market.
It is.
And that's the food that we should be eating most. So it's interesting. That's a show for another.
It is another.
Monsanto and all those other
all
folks.
Of those things. That's
this
right.
This is a great show for another day.
That's right.
But anyway, so how should we think about how we care for our bodies, Mark?
Yeah. So this issue of fresh foods, let's just take this thing one more step here because it really does help us to understand a little bit better about how we ought to be thinking about this. When I think about the issues that surround us concerning fresh foods, I think again about Comenius and the father of modern education. Here's a man who is important to our weekly show. Comenius promotes Warp and Woof Radio. But how does a pastor from the 1700s relate to today? Well, he was the guy who actually did the encyclopedic knowledge thing. So he came in with something called Pansophy. So he saw wisdom everywhere in the world. He was actually the progenitor of the encyclopedia. Anybody who listens to us hears that on a regular basis from me. What was interesting about Comenius, number of things interesting about him, was that Harvard University offered him the first presidency of Harvard, and he turned it down. So here's Comenius turning down the presidency of Harvard University.
His parents were happy with that move.
He was asked to be, turned him down. Harvard's crest, actually, where they have the 3 books. The 3 books are the creation and the Word of God, of course. And this is something that's really fascinating about Harvard's crest, still exists today, actually came out of Comenius' study. So when we're talking about Comenius, we always have to talk about this great theological word. We won't get too deep on this because it's a really important word, but again, a show for another day perhaps. Coherence literally means everything is held together by the one who has made all things. So Colossians 1:17 again, by him are all things held together. Coherence is one of those things that needs to be taught better by the church to help the church, instead of fragment pieces of knowledge, to bring all these pieces of knowledge together, begin to talk about everything being interconnected, again, under the lordship of Jesus, because this is essentially where this is coming from, and we want to make sure to highlight that to people that are listening.
Absolutely. And speaking of connecting, Dennis Abrams with the Wheeler Mission is in the house now. We're going to come back after we talk about how the Christian community can become engaged in the whole person methodology and find out a little bit more about the great programs going on at Wheeler Mission. You are listening to Warp and Woof Radio on the Cool Groove site at radionext.tv. On the Cool Groove site, man, I feel like a Monday morning DJ after that one. Marvin Gaye will take you there. And we're talking about all the things that he was talking about on that great album from what's going on in 1971. Mm-hmm. Talking about it here in 2016. It's amazing. Just honored to have Dennis Abrams with the Wheeler Mission in the house, and we're going to be talking to him at the top of the hour. But we're talking about people as a whole. Who are we as a people as a whole, and how do we come together to make this transition just a little bit smoother, man? I mean, yeah. we are in some times right now that, if you do believe Scripture, we are dealing in those days where the meek and those people in despair, we're going to uprise. Depends on if you're going to get on the train or not, because it is in Scripture. And speaking of Scripture, we have to have our Christian community engaged and discuss the Christian engagement and psychological problems such as Alzheimer's, dementia, schizophrenia, all these things that we're suffering as a community that we need help for.
Yeah. So my first thought is to take us over to Christianity Today. It does some really nice work with this. What's really kind of sad to me, before I get into this, what's been sad to me over all of these years is that Christians are always slow on the uptake. We were slow on the uptake in the 60s with environmentalism and feminism. We should have been at the front of that train, but we weren't. We were on the caboose about 20 or 30 years later. I see the same kind of thing going on with issues of addiction, where the church has a tendency to put people over in a corner or to shut them out or to not listen to them. And I think in the last 3 to 5 years, there's been more openness to the issue of addiction within the church. So I wanted to mention a couple of Christianity Today articles. One of them is entitled How to Celebrate Recovery, and Evangelicals Who Are Opening Up About Addiction. This is actually in this month's Christianity Today. There are a number of great pieces here in Christianity Today, but one of the key ingredients to this is what Ed Stetzer has been talking about. He's now the new executive director for the Billy Graham Center of Evangelism over at Wheaton College, but Ed has been doing stats for so many years. And one of the things that he's emphasized in the work that he's done in statistical analysis is that we need to stop ignoring mental illness in the church. So he came up with some stats, for instance, where he asked pastors the question, how many times do you mention things like addiction, Alzheimer's, dementia, depression, schizophrenia, anything like that from the pulpit? Just mentioning it. Not even preaching about it, just mentioning it. And the statistics were astronomically bad. I mean, guys in the pulpit are not even dealing with this. They're not talking about it as they ought to. We ought to be including this not just in our illustrations, but we ought to be engaging the kinds of principles that Scripture offers to us to help this particular a group of people who are all around us and have a tendency to be shunned or at least set off to the side because we're not listening to them, we're not hearing them. One good example, again, Christianity Today a couple months ago had one woman's story on her bipolar disorder and how she was treated in her own church. So I want to just make just a blanket statement to everybody listening, whether you're live or during the podcast later on. Please begin to read about the issues of addiction, the challenges that people have concerning psychological issues, whether it be schizophrenia, dementia, depression, whatever, so that we can be more loving. I mean, if we are actually reading books of Leviticus where it says that we ought to love the alien and the stranger sometimes is right with us in the church service with us, and we have a tendency to not even recognize them. And so that's my shout out to all the churches to begin to preach about these things and speak about them.
Used to hear it as a kid, holier than thou.
Ooh.
No,
Ooh.
You're not.
No, you're not.
I mean, just plain and simple. No, you're not. What kind of addiction should we be concerned about that impact our Christian communities?
Well, let me begin by saying, hi, my name is Mark, and I'm a sugar addict. Okay, let's be straight up about this. We can be addicted to lots of different things, and quite frankly, I am addicted to sugar. We fall into these patterns and into these habits, and we need to change the patterns. And one of the biggest issues that we confront is that we're afraid to admit these things. Not only to ourselves, but we're afraid to admit it to just anybody. So I'm here to tell you today on air, this will be on a podcast, it will be logged in, this will be for all eternity until Jesus comes back. Mark is a sugar addict. Now, there are some addictions in the church that are acceptable. For instance, sugar addiction, people are going to laugh when they hear that. But God forbid I should say that I have a pornography addiction, or I should have some kind of alcohol addiction, or something else that has this tendency to be set aside as this awfulness. I'm telling you, all addictions are awful because they're all idolatries in one way or another. So I've come up with my 5 C's this week. Remember, I give you five. I give you 5 words every once in a while. So here we go.
Vocabulary, right?
Yeah, that's right. We got 5 C words this week. The first is commit. We all have to commit to understanding that we have problems and issues. The next is the second C word is collective, because we can't do it alone. We have to do it with groups. We have to do it with other people. Folks have to come alongside us. The third is codify, which means we have to plan it out. We got to be intentional about this. We got to write these things out and have a direction that we're going to take. The fourth is custom. That is, we have to form habits. I mentioned this a moment ago, the necessity for pattern setting. And then ultimately is community. The last, I think, and the final step to this, something that should be going all along, of course, but I think is really helpful, and that is community. We need to reach out and help other people. And gee, does that sound like what we do here?
It sounds exactly like what we do, and it sounds like what we need to do just as a community as a whole.
Yep.
And you know, we know that you're a big movie buff. That's where you reside. I thought you were going to say, hi, my name is Mark, and I'm a movie addict. But what are some movies about the whole person that we can consider viewing?
Sure.
To better understand what this dialogue is about today.
Right. And I think Hollywood is finally catching up, too, frankly. Hollywood sometimes is behind the curve, and they certainly have been on this, but more impressive of late. They've been doing some movies like Silver Linings Playbook, which is a good movie by Bradley Cooper and Jennifer Lawrence about the issue of bipolar condition, and I think that's something that ought to be seen, Silver Linings Playbook. A Beautiful Mind by Russell Crowe. This is reaching back a decade maybe, but a very important film that helps us to understand or look inside the mind of a person whose mind doesn't function like everybody else's functions. If you want a comedy, you cannot get any better than Jack Nicholson in As Good as It Gets. Now here is an obsessive compulsive. There are lots of great laugh lines in this. You'll want to be careful about some of the things that you see, but here's a man who bears gifts that other people don't have. And just to interrupt myself here for a second, one of the things we forget and we miss in the church and in society as a whole is that everybody's got a gift. And that gift might be really weird to the rest of us who seem normal. And by the way, what in the world is normal anyway? I don't know what the definition for that word is. But nonetheless, everybody's got a gift. So that gift might come in different forms in ways that we don't necessarily expect it. Another one, this goes back a ways too. This is about a mentally challenged young man, actually portrayed by Sean Penn on screen, called I Am Sam. I Am Sam. If you haven't seen that movie, great stuff. Rain Man, autism, Dustin Hoffman. Need I say any more? Dustin Hoffman. This is just fantastic stuff, the movie Rain Man. Still Alice is a 2014 film starring Julianne Moore about dementia and the difficulties that we face in this particular issue. And one more, and you can go on my website and actually check this out. Back in 2010, I wrote a movie review about Temple Grandin. And here's my first few lines about this film, Temple Grandin. Stop right now. Stop whatever you're doing. Go right now to rent and watch Temple Grandin. This film is one of the best ways I know of getting inside of another human being, to feel what they feel. If it were possible to know how people thought, learned, felt, lived, became who they are, how we would be changed. We often think of changing others, of changing the world, but few of us of changing themselves. Temple Grandin should give us pause to reflect on how our deficiencies may hurt others. And we're not talking about the deficiencies Temple Grandin had. We're talking about the deficiencies we have when we meet somebody different than us. Man, I'm starting to preach now. Look out.
Well, but it's real dialogue, Mark. The main thing is, if you think that you can judge someone for a deficiency or an addiction that they have, go look in the mirror, Mr. or Miss. You will find an addict of some sort when you look in your mirror. And I love how we tie this all together, because we're getting ready to meet Mr. Dennis Abrams, who is with the Wheeler Mission, and we're going to find out some amazing statistics and some amazing things about how people become homeless and how to help as a whole community get these people out of these situations. You are listening to Warping with Radio on the Cool Groove site at RadioNext.tv.
God is not absent on my campus. This is how one Comenius Institute student sees our work at IUPUI. Hi, I'm Dr. Mark Eckel. Multiple studies show that 75% of Christian young people may leave the church altogether after attending public universities. One of the key ingredients to maintaining Christian faith commitment through college is personal, spiritual investment in students. We are committed to spending time with Christian young people. The Comenius Institute, where Christian wisdom and college life meet.
The smoke that you feel coming out of the internet speakers, boy, is our off-site discussion. Want to give big shouts out to Tracy Drain and the employees out at 3M. She's just galvanizing an audience over there. And Miss Linnell Gowdy, who she says wants to come and take the RadioNext.TV airways, Brother Mark. And just honored, man, to have in studio today your special guest, Mr. Dennis Abrams with the Wheeler Mission. And, brother, it's showtime.
All right, let's do it. So we've been talking about the whole person, this particular show, and we want to make sure that we understand everything from our physiology to our psychology and everything in between. So, Dennis, we are just thrilled that you're here on the show today. Thanks so much for being with us. Tell us a little about yourself, your family, your life experiences, your church, and your work in Indianapolis.
All right. I've been with Wheeler Mission now for 2 years. I do a program called the ACTS program, and ACTS stands for Advocacy Community Transitional Services. So my job is to transition guys that have completed programs out into churches, jobs, and housing, and in that order and in that priority. So before coming into ministry, I was in education for 15 years. You joked about your sugar addiction. Mine was pornography and pride. That's how God leveled me in a good way, and so kind of got me to the point where I was looking for a job. And so I'm like, what do I do? And so my wife and I started a ministry for the homeless, and I started seeing a lot of the students that I had kicked out of school, I dealt with on the street, and I'm thinking, what's wrong with the system? Because, you know, we kept the kids as long as we could, we loved on them and everything else, but then it gets to a point where we've got to let them go. So spent 15 years there, and just after that kind of got into prison ministry, not because there's a correlation, just because it was something that I started seeing some of my kids. I had one student in particular that was convicted of murder and got 45 years. So once a year I go and visit him and stuff, but I just saw a lot of this brokenness and this generational poverty in life in real time. So
you said early on in your response to my question that the ACTS program has to go in a certain order, and you start with the church.
Yes.
So let's back up to that for a moment and kind of unpack that a bit.
Okay, for the guys, we've had about 150 men go through the ACTS program. And I'm not into numbers, but there's a point to the numbers. What the guys have done is they've completed an addiction program, which is basically they come into Wheeler Mission at the shelter. They determine which program that would best fit them with case management and everything else. And so they may do the STEPS program, which is an economic program. The guy may be coming out of a divorce, lost a job, jail. And the old notion is, I'll never be homeless, should never come across anyone's mouth or lips, because we're all one paycheck away from being homeless. So once they've completed these different programs, they come into to ACTS, and we basically start looking at churches that our faith statements are similar to Wheeler. We work with different churches. We have 22 partner churches in the Indianapolis area as well as the Bloomington area, because we have a mission down there that we bought a while back. So the church has been the key for these guys. When you hear addiction, everybody says, oh, how many relapses do you have? Well, if you didn't have an addiction, you wouldn't have a relapse. But the greatest thing about the churches has been the fact that if we do have a guy have a relapse, the first question I ask him is, when did you stop going to church? And 100% of the time, it's about 4 weeks ago or a month ago. And so then we're like, okay, get back with the pastor. So we plug back into the pastor. And that has saved a lot of guys coming back in, because that stumbling block has been there for them. And the church has been right there to open arms and and ready to go with them. So.
You mentioned this idea that once somebody stops going to church, that the other problematic issues just kind of crop up. We need to talk about that a little bit further, because, quite frankly, somebody listening to this is going to go, okay, so I don't always go to church, so what's the problem with that? I don't see any issue here. Yeah. So tell us why that's so important for these folk.
Well, for any folks.
For any folks, yeah, there you go.
The biggest thing is what we talked about earlier, and you were talking on the show, is the community. I mean, if you're plugged into a community where not only you're being accountable for, but you're serving, your mind's occupied and your heart's occupied, and those desires of the old ways of thinking and everything else kind of go away. One of the things that someone asked the other day is, how's your program different than another program like Fairbanks or any other program? It's not, and someone can get recover from that and get sober from that. But the difference is we offer Christ and the church as an option, as accountability and a place to serve. So the community key is paramount.
You just mentioned a comparison just for a moment, and we're not here to suggest that the work that some people are doing is wrong or bad or anything like that.
No.
What we are suggesting, however, is that the Christian view of life and things brings something that's very unique. If you could kind of summarize what the Christian view of life and things brings to the issue of addiction, let's say, for instance, what would you say it would be?
I mean, the first thing is getting out of ourselves, seeing our impact on other people. How is that addiction, or how's our impact, or I'm sorry, our behavior impacting other people? And when you start doing that, and you start realizing that you can do so much more by serving other people and helping other people, then the focus becomes off of yourself or off of me, and you're looking and going, wait a minute. And then you've got this also, you have Christ that died on the cross for everybody, and you've got someone that lived a sinless life, and we're complete sinners and a wreck, and yet he still loves us, even through the pit that we put ourselves in through addiction, whether it's pills or drinking or whatever. And it could be shopping, it could be any kind of addiction like we mentioned earlier. I mean, we could laugh about different things, but if that's the life-dominating sin that's controlling not only your pocketbook but your behavior, then it's an issue. So.
Yeah. It interests me when you just said it could be anything. It's exactly true. I think about some of these programs that you see on television, for instance, like hoarders, for instance.
Yeah.
People who hoard things in their homes. They have stacks of magazines or newspapers, and they have these little paths that they get to one place or another through their homes. It can be anything.
Yeah.
And so let's talk just for a moment. Let's flip the script here and flip the coin over and look at the other side of this. We're talking about people who might have real problems and addictions, but let's talk about how the church ought to view those folks, and then perhaps cast the mirror back at themselves a little bit and talk about how it is that we all deal with something or another.
Well, you mentioned earlier again, I mean, it's just talking about it. Actually saying the word pornography, in a church setting sometimes, and some churches would just, nail you to the back of the pew. But the thing is, churches in this community and in Bloomington, they're starting to talk about it. There is this delay or something, because it's that private stuff, that taboo stuff we don't want to talk about, because we want our theology and we want our faith to be sanitized and clean, and it's not. I mean, we're dealing with broken human beings, and it's not going to be clean. And ministry, with no mess, no ministry is the kind of a slogan we say, that it's the truth. But I think just the whole fear of being able to just let go and share these things. I mean, you look at the pastors that that I follow, maybe on YouTube or wherever else, they're falling, and they're falling quick. And it's like these guys are running big multi-mega churches with many different sites and everything else, and they're falling just like me or you. And it's like, so what's not being done there? Well, the relationship and community they're out of. So that's the biggest key there. Again,
you mentioned the word dirty a moment ago, and it immediately makes me think of one of these lines that I talk about on a regular basis, that grace is messy. So let's link the dirt with the grace, shall we?
For us at Wheeler, and for anybody that's doing any kind of ministry with the poor and the homeless, is never going to be clean, and that's okay. Because, did I think 10 years ago I'd be working for Wheeler and enjoying and loving my job every day? No. But I get to work with some of the most incredible human beings, and I mean the clients that we have, the guests that we have. And they're coming from places that I can't even fathom. I can't even begin to believe that they made it. And, the smells at times, we talk about dirty. To be on this Dirty Faith is a book that I read a while back, great book. But, all that dirtiness and everything else is what the church really needs to start doing, is getting their hands dirty. Is it painful, and is it uncomfortable, and does it take you out of your comfort zone? Yeah. But I don't believe any time that Christ was on this earth that he sat around and said, okay, come to this building, we're going to sit in this nice air-conditioned building, and we're going to do just this. Now, he was on the streets, he was in the gutters, he was with the broken, and that's what we do at Wheeler.
When we talk about I use the phrase incarnational theology. When we talk about incarnational theology, when Jesus came to earth, this is the best example that we have of being with people. So remember in Matthew chapter 11 where the Pharisees were getting after him and calling him a wine bibber and a glutton?
Yeah.
One of my favorite phrases about Jesus being a wine bibber and a glutton. The idea that somehow we stand apart and look sanctimoniously at some other group or some other individual and say, well, this is the way they are. And here Jesus is hobnobbing with the prostitutes and the sinners. I mean, it sounds vaguely like what y'all do.
Yeah, and what's funny is we look around and obviously we're not, and this is just how we all feel, we're not a bunch of co-workers. It's a family. And so we may, from Rick Alvis, our CEO, down to, a guy coming in the shelter, we're all equal in God's eyes. And what's so funny is that you'll love on people and everything else. And I started thinking the other day, I was driving back and forth, and I was thinking, man, every person that I'm friends with is a felon. A lot of people are drug addicts, and then it's like a few of the ladies that I know from another church, downtown, it's like prostitutes, drug addicts, felons, murderers. Okay, this is all right. I like that kind of people. It's like I would rather have that background and be as Christ-like as I can be, and just be serving those people. Those people. I don't like that word, and I just said it, but those people are us.
That's right.
And you and I could be in similar situations where I'm on the street one day. So, and that's the thing too, is I think so many people, they'll see somebody and the first thing they think of, and I'm including myself years ago, is like, look at that bum. Why don't they just go get a job? Well, that bum has a name, and that guy has a story, and let's just use the name Dennis, has a life that needs to be repaired. And until we actually find out their name and look at them face to face, does it become personal? Because if we just see the guy with the sign or whatever else, we just look the other way. But when we start learning these guys' names and these ladies' names, and it's like, oh, wait a minute, you were what? You're a PhD, and it changes everything then. So
yeah.
The perspective.
It's interesting when I think about this discussion about, quite frankly, about murderers and addicts and felons, for instance, who are a lot more honest than the rest of us. Talk about that for a minute.
Well, what's crazy is, I call them my guys, my axe guys. I have anywhere between 15 to 25 on average, and they have my cell phone number, and they can call at any time, and prefer they text at night, but they'll call and they'll text and they'll say, I need some prayer for this. And what they will say is so personal and so just, about themselves, an issue they may be struggling with lust or something else. And I'm looking at the text going, wow, this is real, because they're being honest. And I'll have a guy come in and say, this is what I did. And it's not to impress me. It's just to let me know, listen, this is who you're dealing with. And I'm broke. And I'm going, first time I ever went into prison, I'll never forget. I was at Kairos Prison Ministry, and we were at Plainfield. And this guy comes up, and I'll remove the expletive, but he says, I've never done this prison stuff. And I'm shaking his hand. I'm literally shaking because I was like, dude, I've never did this prison stuff. And so he starts to tell me, he goes, you know what I'm in here for? I was like, I don't care. We don't care. So it's just, they're honest, and it's refreshing, really, because that mask comes off, and it's a totally different person.
This is some really great information, some real great perspective coming from Dennis Abrams. We're going to come back after a break here, a musical interlude, as I like to say, some cool jazz music that HB is going to set up for us. And we're going to come back and spend the next 25 minutes after that talking with Dennis about specifics about his ACTS program, Wheeler Mission. You are listening to Cool Groove Radio, and this is the Warp and Woof radio show, Cool Groove Site. You are listening to RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. This is Warp and Woof Radio, Wednesdays, every Wednesday from 10 till noon. And we have all kinds of special guests every single week. We talk about all manner of ideas and problems and issues that confront us as Christians. The focal point of our show is Titus chapter 3. 3 commands there in Titus 3. Do good, do good, do good. So every week we have a new guest that is doing good in the Indianapolis community. And this week, Dennis Abrams is joining us. from Wheeler Mission. And we have just had a great time in the first segment of the show talking about specifics of ministry and experiences in life. Dennis, we're going to come into this next 25-minute segment now and talk about this whole person issue. So in our first hour, we focused on the whole person. Tell us a little bit about the importance of wholeness when it comes to Wheeler Mission.
Okay. The biggest thing is, you joked about your C's or whatever. I've got the 5 H's. So when anyone comes into the shelter, the first thing is to figure out which program is best for them. And then once we figure that out, if they want to stay, because they have they can stay there and then leave for the next morning. But once they're in a program, is to get their health right. Because the guys that are coming in from off the street, they may have all kinds of colds or whatever else. With addiction, you're going to have other ailments and everything else. So getting them healthy, getting them taking care of their legal during the orientation phase of our programs is a big deal, because once you get them healthy and you get them fed, then we start working on the heart. And so once you get into the heart and you start talking about what brought you here, and kind of looking at their relationship with Christ and how far they've come away from that. Some of our people that come through are not believers, and that's perfectly fine too. You're going to have people that come through the program, get the benefit of the Christian atmosphere and the Christian, faith, but don't want to follow Christ, and that's between them and Christ. That's not between them and Wheeler. So then the next thing is kind of moving them towards the head aspect of. We've got guys that have maybe been down or been in prison for years and don't have the skills that they need. They don't have a proper resume. They don't know how to budget. So the classes that the guys go through teach them that kind of stuff. And then the discipleship focus is what this whole recovery program is. It's not psychological or anything else. It's just talking about man's depravity and man's sin nature. And then kind of after they're going through that, that's kind of the program. And then the hands and the homes is kind of where I kick in, is getting them busy and getting them working again, getting them sometimes working for the first time. And it's like you think, how can that guy be 50 years old and never had a job? Well, there's a lot of factors to that, and it's each person's story, so it's different. But getting them jobs and getting them places where they want to be. And I never talk to a guy about I always start off with, what's your background, which is great, because it kind of gives me an idea of their skill set. But then my next question to him is what do you want to do? Now, it's got to be within reason. When I'm says a doctor, that's not going to, may happen, I don't know. But the problem is, or the point of that is to kind of see what they want, to give them a goal. And so by giving them a goal and everything else, it's giving them the new look on life. And they've got all these tools and everything else with Christian walk and Christian faith. So then, by finding them homes, and I don't like to say houses because they're finding homes, and some of them are reconnecting with families, wives, divorced, that was on the verge. God's, brought them back together. Divorce is off, and they're a family unit again, and happy. So
those are good things. I wanted to take us back a minute. I keep doing this to you, going back to something you said earlier. You said that the first priority of getting folks off the street is to get them healthy. And you talked about the physiology of their persons, and then the next step is to deal with their heart issue. So what kind of intersection are you seeing between the physical nature of a human being and the psychological, spiritual nature of a human being? What is the connection there for us?
Well, the biggest thing is you get, take our own self. If I haven't eaten in a day, I don't think I've went without eating for a day, but you go a time frame without eating, you go a time frame without proper health care. And the other thing is, psychologically, you go a time frame where you're feeling down and nobody's there to just even smile at you or even acknowledge you. That starts to play on you, and you start to take in that track, a mental, audio track of, I'm not good, I'm worthless, I deserve what I've gotten. And by just bringing the guys in and bringing the ladies in, it's a matter of just letting them know they're loved, and letting them know that they're wanted. And I think the hardest thing for everyone that works at Wheeler is to convince, and I don't mean convince like we're shucking and jiving, but their importance in the kingdom and their importance as a human being to each of us and to the families and everything else that they have. And But the health is, getting their teeth fixed, and we have volunteers that come in, and we have a medical clinic, and we have a dental clinic, and now we've, by the grace of God, we have a vision clinic. And these are all professionals that are busy people, and they're taking time out to fix a guy's teeth they don't know. And, and to see a guy like, for instance, last night a guy got his teeth worked on, and he had a few removed, but he was smiling because he felt like he was on the mend. And the health component's a big thing. It's just being healthy and feeling good. So.
This is something that, once again, I get kind of unnerved with Christians who want to segment us out, fragment our persons, draw us into some kind of pie chart that says here's our physical, here's our spiritual, and so on, where all of these things really do come together. And I think, for instance, about what it's like not to get sleep. If you're not sleeping
absolutely.
properly, that kind of thing, really. And then, add that to sleeping in a refrigerator box under an underpass.
Or add that to an addiction that you have to feed every day. Of, not that they want to continue to do it, but it's that addiction they don't know how to get out. And, to get your body detoxed from that stuff.
Right.
From any drug or alcohol or anything, even sugar. It's a process. And, they've got to have people around. We have to have people around that love on them. And, and the community here in Indianapolis and the community in Bloomington has that. And the churches are coming around. And the networking up here is one of the key things for, we may have a program for one guy, and it may be great for him, but then there's another program down the road for, convicted felons of more heinous crimes. This person, so the networking there, we always can send somebody out, refer somebody out, and vice versa, because there is that network up here.
It sure does not sound like a competition, but a cooperation.
Oh, there's no competition. It's to the point where it's like, if a guy comes in and they're saying, this is my background and stuff, then these programs that we have probably won't be best suited for you, and so we can refer them out. And they're looking at us like, why are you helping? It's like, why wouldn't we help you? And the other programs are doing the same thing, and it's just a give and take. And it's the same thing with the Acts partner churches that we have. We have a church, Brookside Community, that we partner with, and that entire staff. We're bouncing ideas back and forth, and we're referring people back and forth, and we have our guys going to Bible studies. We visit the church as a family from Wheeler, and one of our guys, December 19th, came to the Addiction Recovery Program and did SLT, which is our servant leadership training, where he volunteered for an extra 9 months, and basically invested in other men, took the tools that he learned, and is loving on the guys. He works at Wheeler, and now this is his first sermon, and he's never preached in his life. And that's kind of the amazing things that God does there every day. So.
Those are such good things, and great opportunities, obviously, to connect each of us in our different institutions and organizations with each other. So tell us about your focus. What is it that you do day to day?
Day to day is just, which is cool every day. I was telling you before we went on air, I get emails every day from whether it's our administration or business leaders and community people saying, hey, we got some jobs open. Do you have anybody? And when this started 2 years ago, it may have been that way, but it's to the point now that I literally have more jobs than I have men. So what I'll do is we can send those jobs over to different agencies. Hey, by the way, so-and-so, we've got some jobs. You want to send some of your guys there? And it's been great because the jobs that the guys are getting through Acts, none of the jobs will be seasonal. There's nothing wrong with seasonal work. But anyone coming out of addiction, anyone coming out of an unstable environment needs a consistent income. You need to have kind of set that routine so you've got it all the time. And the average of our jobs that are paying is $12 to $14 an hour. And they could go up, but for the majority, it's been incredible. We have a partnership with Express Employment on the west side. And they call up and say, hey, we got 8 jobs. We don't have anybody to fill them. And within, an hour, we have guys calling and they're filling them. And that's the thing, too, is the misconception, and if nothing else, the listeners hear nothing else, they need to hear this, because the misconception of a guy on the street is a bum, he's a loser, or whatever else, or look at that guy from Wheeler. That's not the perception, and that perception has been blown out of the water through the STEPS program that the guys, the economic program, the recovery program, the working guest over at the shelter, the staff at all these locations, the ladies at CWC, they're all working hard to just get everybody back to working, and not only working, but I mean, I've got employers that literally would say, "Do you have any more guys?" And I'm like, "No, why?" And I thought someone was going to get fired. We want more guys because they're willing to work and they're willing to invest the time because people have invested that time in them.
Wow, this has tremendous impact for this community. Why is coaching men important to you personally?
The first person, other than my grandfather, the first person that really poured into me was a guy named Tom Petrie, and he was a math teacher when I taught at South High School. Sorry, but we get emotional, but. And so I'm sitting there as a second-year teacher. I had no idea what I was doing. And Tom walks by. He's this revered older teacher, Christian man, and he looked at me, and I'll never forget. He says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Nothing." He said, "Get up. Come on." I'm like, "Okay." And so we went to the library, and he asked me if I wanted to be a part of this Bible study. And so I sat there with Tom and two older teachers, and these are guys that I respected. And that was just, I'll never forget that, because here I was, young teacher, didn't have any experience, didn't really know what I was doing. And then he took the time. And I think just, looking back at some of the people, my own minister at Sherwood Oaks, Tom Ellsworth, I mean, he pours into me, we pour into each other kind of thing. I have a friend and a neighbor, Glenn Hughes, which is a pastor as well. He was there right after, my fall as far as from school and everything else. And he was there to get in the pit with me. And it was nice to have that. And it's just important. I see so many of the kids that came from divorce, and whenever I was assistant principal and stuff, and I'd see these families broken, and the families would be coming through, and the issues and the problems with each kid were the same. It's like, where are the dads? Better yet, where are all the men? I grew up with my grandfather, the greatest generation, and I mean, it was the greatest generation. I mean, he battled through the Depression. He was fought in World War II. He raised a family. And, where are these guys? Where are them, those leaders anymore? And so that's the biggest thing, is just we all need each other. And we need honest and frank discussion, because there would be days that some of my guys that, we don't particularly get along. And that's okay, because they have the right to talk, talk to me, as well as, vice versa. And I learn probably more from them than I'll ever teach them. So,
the issue of manly men
yes.
Would be an important issue here, right?
Yeah.
So one of the people that I tell folks about his name is Stephen Mansfield. Stephen Mansfield's a great speaker, written a whole bunch of books. Of late, his focus has been on manly men. So StephenMansfield.tv, as I recall, is his website, and just something to consider for the future. Anybody is listening out there. The emphasis on coaching and the specific connections to us personally have an awful lot to do with the people who have impacted us. So you mentioned that there were some folks who have spoken into your life and how that's influenced you to speak into others. Tell us some stories about men whose lives have been changed by the influence of Wheeler Mission.
Well, without giving, full names and stuff, but it's been incredible to see. I had a gentleman a while back, and he was looking for a job, and we looked everywhere, and Steve Kerr, our director of development, sent me an email, completely out of the blue, and says, "Do you have a donut fryer?" And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, are you kidding me? And so I just talked to this guy, and we'd been praying together. He was crying, and I went upstairs, and I go, "Listen, this is a really off-the-wall question, but you know how to fry donuts?" And he starts bawling, and I'm thinking, what did I say wrong? And he goes, "Are you kidding me?" I'm like, "No." And he says, "I fried donuts for the last however many years, at a grocery store chain here locally." And so I give him the number and everything else. He calls just God, one of those divine appointments that he's been, and he's still working there to this day. That's almost a year now that he's been working there. And it's just those kind of things where God just kind of delivers whenever they're at their, and I can be at my bottom because thinking, I don't know what else to do. we're praying, we're waiting, and my motto or my mantra to the guys is we need to be quiet and listen. And sometimes it's hard because either they're trying to figure it out or I'm trying to figure it out, and that's when we both need to look at each other and just like, be quiet. And so when we're still, that's usually when it happens. We've had guys that have come through, and with Wheeler having the reputation they have for over 125 years, it's been incredible because we had a gentleman that was facing 5 felonies. He had all kinds of these issues legally and everything else. So in the beginning at intake, they started working with the court system, and so long story short, he goes through the program, and the judge starts to see this pattern and his behavior kind of change, and his not necessarily but when he'd appear in court, there was a difference in him. It was confidence. It was healthy. He was, had his head on straight. He was getting right with God, and quite honestly, he was living drug-free for the first time in a long time. So at the end of this whole ordeal, he goes to court, and the judge just dropped all the felonies. I said, I can't penalize you for what you've done because everything you've done is done to move forward. And so, that's not the case for everybody. So if some listeners listen, I can go to Wheeler and get my felony. No, that's not the case. But that's just what God allows. And, I mentioned the gentleman that's going to preach for the first time. We've got guys going out in jobs that are complete secular jobs and being a great example. One of the biggest influences, we talk about someone having an impact on our lives. We had a gentleman named Kevin, and Kevin came through Wheeler, and he was excited, and he was on fire for God. He was a believer before he came to Wheeler, but he gets through the program. He goes through Acts, and we meet once every couple of weeks to eat, and he was all excited, just constantly. Well, we got a phone call one morning that he passed away, and we're like, oh my gosh. And so we're thinking about this, and it's like, wait a minute. He came through the programs. He's right with God. He's a blessing to everybody he works with and friends that we all, were around. His family's restored. Everything's right with this. So it's like, it's awful that he's gone, but yet there's peace about it because he knew where he was going. And that's probably the biggest difference between maybe another program and ours is that peace of mind of eternal security. So.
Speak to, since you mentioned peace, I have to bring in another word. And that is the word hope. So talk about hope and the importance of that at Wheeler.
When you walk through the doors, whether you're a volunteer or whatever else, you don't feel this clap. You don't feel a big, heavy burden on your shoulders. You see guys smiling, you see women smiling, you see children smiling, and it just resonates hope. Just the way people talk to each other. You won't go from point A to point B without getting stopped and somebody asking who you are or hugging you, or just wanting to know what they can do for you, even in the situation where they have absolutely nothing. They're like, can I do something for you? And guys will say that all the time. Is there anything I can do for you? I'm like, no, just finish the program and invest in other guys and invest in your family. And seeing hope seeing hope is one thing, but actually seeing a guy experience it. I had a gentleman in my office last night, we're talking, and this light just kicked on. And it was just a matter of he was asking some questions of I said, what can we do as Wheeler for you to help you finish strong and everything else? And we could, the particular thing he wanted, we have a church that helps with license to help a guy get his license back. If it's, so it's a few $100s, and he's like, starts to cry, and I'm like, what? He goes, do you realize what I can do with my life now? And I said, what do you mean? He goes, I can get a job now where I used to drive. So seeing that hope play out is great, and we can talk about it and grace and everything else, but until we experience it with each other, is his words. So
the issue of actually putting hands and feet to the concepts that are in Scripture that make a difference for us as Christians is really where this is all at. This isn't just something that's an intellectual, academic process.
No, it's far from it. There's moments where it's far from that. It's moments whenever you're holding on to a person or a guy that's sobbing to the point of, I'm going to die. There's a gentleman that's been on the streets for years in Bloomington. I've known him through some different volunteer things I did there. Wheeler Mission has acquired the mission that was down there in Bloomington, and last night I walk in and I see this guy, and he's looking at me, and I'm looking at him, and I'm thinking, come on, please don't be doing the same scam game as far as hitting every place to see what I can get. And so I started to walk away, and he's like, hey, you going to talk to me? And I'm like, are you for real? And he goes, what do you mean? I said, are you really going to stay here and do this program? And he burst out into tears, and I'm like, okay, I think God's got this guy. I said, why are you here? And he said, I can't do it anymore. He said, if I make one more run, meaning outside of Wheeler, I'm dead. And we talked for about an hour, and it was so cool because you could just see. I mean, he had his appointment for intake today, and he was asking about the program, and he's never had that because I've only seen him probably sober half a dozen times. And now this guy's got this, gleam in his eye of, wait a minute, I'm 48 years old, he's saying, and I can be drug-free and alcohol-free. So
It interests me as I hear you tell these things that the famous line of Jesus that it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle and a rich man to get into heaven. Sometimes the riches are the things that keep us furthest away when people come to the end of themselves. So that there are some really great lines in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 where it says, not many rich, not many powerful, to which those who are rich and powerful will thank Jesus for the letter M, because it doesn't say not any, but not many.
Right.
But speak to this issue about coming to the end of oneself, and do you see that? I mean, you just told a story about a guy who basically did that. Do you see that on a regular basis?
We see it on a regular basis, but what's so refreshing is the fact that anybody that's been through the program or anything else, we can look at them and go, it's all right. Look at so-and-so, these guys have done this. God has brought them out of this addiction. These ladies have done this. And, and just to be able to share that with them right off the bat, because they think they're alone. I mean, they think they're the only person that's ever been addicted to opiates or heroin or whatever else on the earth. And it's like, no. And so normally the guys, once they go through a screening process with the addictions program, and it's just a matter of, are you willing to are you teachable? Are you willing to submit? And submit, and you think, oh well, that means authority, and you've got your thumb on them. But it's are you willing to submit to what God's got in store for you, and just take that chance? Because what's worked for you up to this point, it's not worked out real well. And so we see a lot of guys and families. There was a husband and wife a while back that did the intake, and he was there for his intake, and then she went up to the women's center. And I'm watching them, and they're two young kids in my mind. And I'm 46 years old, and I'm looking at these 20-some-year-olds, and they're addicted to heroin. And the one, they're a married couple, and so they've successfully completed the program. They've went through this, and they have changed so much from the little smart aleck that was sitting there in that intake to the man that he is now. And it wasn't anything to do with anybody at Wheeler. And none of us do that. God does that. And that's one thing that, they're together to this day. They've started a family. They're working full time. They're in a church. They're involved. And so that's the hope, is to see that brokenness and that absolute utter just, I want to die. Be brought forth to God. So.
The whole point of the program, of course, is the whole person, so we're bringing brokenness into wholeness, and it's not we who are doing it, we're just the hands and feet. Jesus is the one who changes lives. So let's give some love out to some of the businesses and company leaders around Indianapolis who are involved with Wheeler Mission. We've got a few minutes left here. Tell us about some of those folks and why they're important.
Well, I think the biggest thing, if you go to our website and look, we have on Thanksgiving Day, we have the Turkey Drumstick Dash. And you look at the number of businesses that are supporting us financially, helping put on that run. I mean, you got nearly 20,000 people going to be running that day to feed people. And you think, well, that's just running. No, it isn't. What every donor needs to know, and every runner needs to know, and everybody that walks the doors of Wheeler, it may just be money that you're giving, but you're changing lives. I mean, to the point of death. and eternal damnation to life and a relationship with Christ. And the businesses that, I mean, you can look on there that I just went through there, and it's like Jay's Moving and different businesses that, I mean, they are longtime supporters, and there's tons of their, I don't want to try to name them all because I'll miss somebody, but, you know, we have a company that, Reese Asphalt Company, seal coating. You know, we made a connection, and he's like, hey, I want to hire your guys. And so it wasn't a sell because, you know, he had been volunteering, been a part of Wheeler. And it was crazy because he hired the first guy, and he calls me and after the first day of work, and he was like, you have any more? I'm like, yeah. So the businesses are definitely there supporting Wheeler, not only financially, but, you know, prayer-wise and everything else. So
that's great. So when you think about any last words, any final thoughts, what are some things that come to your mind?
I think the biggest thing is just when you're walking down the street or you see the person with the sign and all that, just remember they got a name. And they've got a story. They got a family. They got a mother, the father. Some of them may not know where they're at right now. And I'm not saying the best thing to do is give them money. That's not it. But give them a smile at least. Let them know that you care, and maybe stop and pray with them, or say, "Hey, you know, I know where there's this, you know, mission. It's just down the street, you know." But just seeing homeless not as a plague or, you know, the negative thing of society, but just seeing it as a welcoming opportunity to love somebody, that because it could easily be near you. So
sounds like do good to me.
Absolutely.
There you go. Dennis Abrams here from Wheeler Mission. It's been great to have you on the program today, Dennis. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. This is RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. You're listening to Warp and Woof Radio. We will return next week, next Wednesday from 10 to noon, when we discuss issues of business and We Power. Phil will be up here with me, and he'll be joining me. HB is going to be joining some young people out down at the Avondale Meadows. There you go, down at the Y. So we're going to be doing some flipping of personnel next week, but we're going to have a great time. Thanks for joining us this week. See you again next week.